Hello, and thanks once again for joining me for The Hammer, an umpire podcast. I'm Kevin Weber. I think I've got a real exciting show for you this week. We're going to take a look at the history of the designated hitter rule. I'll talk to you about umpire camps. We'll spotlight Hall of Fame umpire Hank O'Day, and we'll have our first ever interview on The Hammer with Tim Farwig, NCAA Division I umpire from Elkhart, Indiana. So, sit back, make sure your speakers are working right, your earbuds are in tight for this week's episode of The Hammer. Well, for this episode's Umpire Spotlight, I'd like to look at Hank O'Day, National League umpire and Hall of Fame umpire. His nickname was the Reverend. And O'Day is the only person to have served in the majors as a player, a manager, and an umpire, and a scout, working, the National League for 40 years, 30 of those calling games. He was at the plate for no-hitters in 4 decades and was behind the plate for both the famous Merkle-Boner play in 1908 as well as the only unassisted triple play in World Series history in 1920. And he ended up umpiring in 10 World Series, including the first Fall Classic in 1903. He actually was a player in the 1880s and into the early 1890s and was successful in the World Series himself. He won 2 games in the 1889 World Series and played for nearly 10 years before arm trouble. He was a pitcher before arm trouble started giving him some trouble. When he came in as an umpire in the later part of the century in the early 1900s, umpires were routinely spiked, kicked, sworn at, spit upon by players. Fans, hurled curses and bottles and whatever else they might have at the umpires. Mobbings and physical assaults by players and patrons alike became commonplace. They needed police escorts. That was a familiar thing to see. It was rough, and you had to be very mentally tough and maybe a little crazy too to want to be an umpire in the early days. And still the game was forming at the time. I mean, there were some things that Hank O'Day did to help improve the game, much like Bill Clem, who we talked about last year, though both men were quite different. But anyway, some innovations. O'Day kind of introduced the foul strike. After 2 foul strikes, it's just a continued foul ball. They were talking about coming up with other ways to well, before that they didn't do that. You just could foul a ball off and it wasn't a strike unless you swung and missed or it was called strike. So he did that to help improve the pace of the game. 1910, they're talking about the game being a little too low scoring, so they wanted to add 4 strikes instead of 3, which that's just a crazy thought to think about. But he was against that. He talked about actually adding a cork-centered ball, which is what they did. And that seemed to work, and not all things in baseball have worked, but in general, they seem to kind of work out. I mean, him being a pitcher, he kind of looked at those things. He was early on against getting rid of the spitball and some of the other things against pitching, all right? The big thing with him is, like I said, he was different than Bill Clem. I mean, Bill Clem was, more of a, out there, guy that was respected by a lot of people. He was more of a showman and self-promoter. O'Day, he didn't want to be in the public eye. Clem was a drinker. He dined with players and managers, which that'd be a big no-no nowadays. O'Day avoided all off-field contact with baseball people. Clem would, make up his own rules at times. O'Day, would suggest things on the rules committee and then get them changed. He wouldn't change them in the game himself. But he insisted on the enforcement of the rules as written. Whereas, in Clem would kind of do his own thing. And that's kind of the case with the most famous thing that goes with O'Day, the 1908 Merkle-Boner play at the Polo Grounds in New York, when the Chicago Cubs were visiting and playing the New York Giants in a tight game. They were neck and neck for the pennant, and remember, there's no divisions back then, so if you won the National League, you went to the World Series. So there was first and third, and there was a single to second, and we had Fred Merkle, the young center fielder for the Giants, was on first. And as was the custom of the day, when there was hit and the runner from third scored, a lot of the fans would pour onto the field. They didn't really have outfield fences and those kind of things. So to get away from them, they would just basically run to the dressing room, which was frequent, I believe in the Polo Grounds, was in center field. So he ran out there. He never touched second base. So Johnny Evers saw this. He tried to get the ball. Joe McGinnity, the big all-star type pitcher for the Giants, grabbed it and threw it into the stands. There's a big tussle and everything, some chaos on the field. O'Day's watching the whole thing. He was actually working with a partner, a younger partner on that day. A lot of times he would work by himself, especially those early days. Only sometimes did they actually have a partner. Anyway, he's watching. Somehow, Evers got a ball. Don't know if it was the actual ball or the one that was thrown, or some other one that he found. Probably wasn't the one thrown into the stands. He went and stood on second. They meant he had to force out. The base umpire was not paying attention, so he conferred with O'Day, who watched the whole thing, and basically said, no, he never touched second. They declared him out. The field was all shambles, of course, and people all over the place, so he's like, there's no way we're going to be able to clear this and finish this game before dark, because, obviously there's no lights in 1908. So they had to replay the game, if needed, at the end of the season. Of course, Cubs and the Giants finished tied with 95 wins. They had to replay the game, and of course the baseball gods were not with the umpires, and the Cubs won and went on to beat the Detroit Tigers in the World Series and all that kind of stuff. And for the next 17 years until he stopped umpiring, O'Day was definitely reminded of that every time he went to the Polo Grounds. And it was worse for Fred Merkle, because it's Merkle's boner, because everybody said he cost them the pennant. So that was the rule. Later on, like Bill Clem and some other umpires, but notably Bill Clem, said that it was a stupid call and he shouldn't have made that call and he shouldn't have allowed the run. And nowadays, we would all say, I would think that it's the right call. That is what the call is. You're supposed to go to that next base as the rules are written, not just kind of make up your own thing and say, well, that's good enough. All right. Though, again, we don't really know for sure if it was the actual ball that was there. So in a lot of ways, Hank O'Day should be given more credit with the innovations and things that he did as an umpire. It's always said that Bill Clem was the greatest umpire of that time period in the early 1900s. But O'Day, doesn't get that credit because he was this kind of a loner kind of guy that wasn't particularly friendly. And, it kept him out of the Hall of Fame for a long time, until 1989, well after he had died, is when he got into the Hall of Fame as an umpire. He should have been one of the first to actually go in. It's kind of interesting that a couple times, I think it was 1912 and 14, he stopped umpiring, Hank O'Day did, and he first managed the Cincinnati Reds, and they were, 10 games under 500 or something. And then he went back to umpiring, and then in 1914, he managed the Cubs. And they were under 500 as well, and he went back to umpiring. So he has those experiences. He was known as a guy with a quick trigger. He threw out a lot of guys throughout his career. Third highest percentage rate of ejections in Major League Baseball umpire history. But people say he was fair, Basically, though, you just knew there were certain things you can't do. Your conduct, that's why he's called the preacher. So, swearing and things like that. He did not put up with any of that kind of stuff. And if you were coming after him, he was gonna run you right away. But they said, he gave people a little bit of a leash to, not like a call or something, because he was competitive. He was a player. He was a manager. He understood what they were going through. But he only took so much. I think it was Christy Mathewson said that, arguing or having a conversation about a play with Hank O'Day was like, trying to see how much gas is in a gas tank with a cigar. You're really ready to blow up the situation any moment now. So he was one of the more respected umpires of his day. Definitely helped young players and young umpires as well come along, and contributed a lot to the game in the early days to make it the game that we know it is today. So no doubt about that. I mean, the foul strike rule, I like that. I mean, I'm glad that it's 2 strikes, with 2 foul balls there. Otherwise, we'd be there all the day. Some guys complain about, 3-hour game, man. We'd have 5-hour games if those weren't counted as strikes right away. So that's what I got. Hank O'Day, Baseball Hall of Fame umpire. His Hall of Fame plaque in Cooperstown, New York, it reads, umpire 1890, and he umpired up to 1927, earned universal respect and praise for unwavering resolve to make the right call, especially unpopular decisions, as strong-handed enforcer of the game's rules, and accrued nearly a half a century of service in baseball, more than 3 decades as a premier NL umpire, another 10 years as a manager and a player. Selected as arbiter for 10 World Series, including the first Modern Fall Classic in 1903, umpired nearly 4,000 games, third most in history at the time of his retirement. Displayed great courage in making controversial Merkle-Boner play call in 1908 and establishing authority for the profession. And he did some, umpire training and recruitment and things afterward. So, courage and confidence, that's something that every official and definitely every umpire needs to make the call that is not going to be popular. And Hank O'Day is the poster man of what that is. He knows he's going to make that call in 1908, and people are going to try to beat him up, literally, okay? But he's going to do it. I mean, it's really easy to sit there and say, no, it's good, he's safe, let's get off the field, that kind of stuff. But Hank O'Day was not that kind of guy. He was going to do the right thing. So something to learn from and something to aspire to. And that's this week's Umpire Spotlight. Frequently I'm asked about umpire camps and what I think about those, as far as being kind of a newer assigner, but also just as an umpire that's attended a good number of camps. I personally try to go to at least one camp a year. I've gone to 2 or more at times, for a variety of reasons. I think that it certainly helps you maintain the things that you've learned, maintain your base knowledge that you have, to reflect and go over things that should be basic to you, that sometimes we fall into habits and we don't do them. Obviously, if you're working a lot of 2-man, and you're newer to it, and then you go to 2-man camps or a 2-man advanced camp, then you get better at that system. If you continue to progress, then you should go to a 3-man camp, because there might be some opportunities for you there, or potentially a 4-man camp. And a lot of those are invitation only, but those are good things to go to. They work on basics there as well, but they work on the specifics of those mechanics. Some guys think that going to a camp, you're basically like paying to try to get yourself assignments. Now, is there some truth to the fact that if you go to camps and you show assigners that you're willing to put in the effort to get better, and then they're looking at their Arbiter or whatever software system they use to assign, they see your name, they see some other guy's name, you've gone to the camp, he hasn't, you're very equal, yeah, you're probably more than likely to get the assignment over him. So I guess that money you put into it maybe does do that. I don't think that assigners, there's no assigners I know, that if you don't go to the camp you get no assignments. I don't know. I mean, I guess individuals are different, but I find that hard to believe. You got to show that you're willing to get better, and that's what camps do. Now, what camp is right for you? Well, some guys want to go to, the more well-known camp that might be out of their region. You really need to start to go to camps that are in the region that you live, with the assigners that actually might give you games. There's no reason if you live in the Midwest, like Michigan, like I do, to go to some camp out in California with a bunch of West Coast assigners that are more than likely never going to give me a game. I mean, it's not like they're flying me across the country to do some game or something. So I'm definitely much better off going to a camp in the general Midwest, and hopefully checking out. You got to look at the websites and see what assigners might be there, or who the instructors that are running the camp might report to, and go to those camps. That's money better spent. If you're planning on moving out someplace, there you go. I mean, it is an exposure thing. You're showing what you can do. There's no possible way that assigners can see every umpire. And even if they do see you, they only see a certain things that you do. Maybe you're working the bases, and there's not a whole lot that happens. If you're working the plate, that's maybe a little bit better if they happen to stop by one of your games. But if it's 37 and snow flurries, they're only going to stay for so long. But at the camp, they get to see you do a variety of things. Even if you make mistakes, they get to see how you react to those things and how you try to get better. So the more times you can do that and show people that you're trying to get better and you're trying to improve any weaknesses you have, the better. There's no doubt about that. And if you're not willing to put in that money, which usually if you do your taxes and stuff, a lot of stuff for officiating you can deduct from taxes. You can deduct your camps and stuff. I mean, that's definitely something to look into. So I'm not telling you how to do your taxes, but it's definitely within the legality of it all. So you can kind of get it back later on. The money that you put into it, it's definitely worth it. Here, I'll just use an example. I just had somebody the other day that was asking me about what camps they should go. So Bruce Stone Jr. Was one of our main assigners here in Michigan and in the surrounding states for high school baseball, but predominantly for collegiate baseball. He has 3 camps that he runs, that he started in the name of his father. So he's got his regular kind of 2-man regular camp that he runs in either January or February inside here at the community college in Grand Rapids. Then he added a few years ago the 2-man advanced camp, which is outside during the late summer or early fall at Davenport University. And around that same time, maybe a little bit after it, more a September time frame, is his 3-man camp. And he's thinking about adding a 4-man camp, but it's not there yet. So these are 3 camps that we have here that, $275, I believe, for the January, February one, like $300 for the other ones. I mean, I go to these because they're local. They're 20 minutes away from my house. I've attended all of them. I usually now go to one camp. I usually go to the 3-man camp. If he ever adds a 4-man camp, I hopefully get to go to that. I've gone to the 2-man advance. I've gone to the January, February one, I think at least 3 times. And, some of the same instructors are there. Some are different. Bruce, of course, is always there, and he's the main assigner that assigns most of my games. So I'd rather him see me do whatever I do, good or bad, and also have things reported back to him from the instructors there on what I've gotten better at or what I need to work on. Because he's the one that's going to give me games. Or he's going to talk to Rich Fetchett, who I'm sure a lot of you know, who assigns a vast majority of the Division I games here on the eastern side of the country. All right, particularly in the Midwest. So he can talk to him. And then potentially any other D2 assigners that might be out there that are in a different state. That works much better for me than traveling to, the Northeast and going to one of the camps out there. Not saying those aren't good camps. They certainly are. But it's not beneficial to me. And plus I'd have to, if you can have a camp like I do that's local and you don't have to get a hotel, you don't have to go out to eat every night and spend the money on that and the gas money, or even flying into it, then that's certainly much more worthwhile to do. So anyway, I was talking to this umpire the other day, and he's gone to the January, February camp 4 times, and maybe he's past that. I think he probably is. Maybe the 2-man advance camp is really where he should be potentially the 3-man camp, but he's kind of a newer collegiate official, so he's probably not really ready for 3-man at this point, but if he wanted to do it, that's fine. But to prove to Bruce and to the other instructors that he's capable, that would probably be the best fit for him. And sometimes, some guys prove it in their first year. Some guys, it takes 2 or 3 years, There's varying plans, but if you keep working at it, whatever your pace is, it's hard not to compare yourself to other people, but if you keep working at it, eventually you'll get it, and you'll show that you have the, conviction to keep moving forward. All right. So that's kind of my suggestion. You kind of look there. I know that CBUA, like that I'm a part of, that's Midwest and basically Midwest center of the country and everything. Bruce's camps are affiliated with that. I know they have the evaluation clinic down in Westfield, Indiana. I believe that they have a 3-man clinic in Springfield, Missouri. They got like a 3- and 4-man camp, more for higher level kind of D1 type guys in Oklahoma and Norman. So those are definitely good ones, to look into if you're in those areas of the country. But I know that like out east, I believe they have, I think it's out east that they have the black and blue umpire camps. And then, there's southern umpire camps are there too. There's the I can't remember them right off the top of my head, but there's several that are down in Florida that are really good camps. I see some of the film on those and check them out. And of course, there's always pro school, but that's a whole nother situation, which maybe I'll talk about at some point. But I'll briefly say that if you're considering pro school, you need to talk to somebody that went to pro school and see what the experience is and see what they think about it. And maybe they, especially someone that went and has seen you umpire, and get their opinion on that and see if that's something that's worthwhile for you. Your age depends on it, obviously your ability. It's not like a given thing you should do it. Now, if particularly if you want to try to get a job in minor league ball and try to work your way up. If you're just doing it just to improve yourself, and for a high school or collegiate umpire, and you certainly would. I mean, I'd love to go to pro school just to do that. I'm never going to be a minor league umpire. If they offer me a job, I mean, I've got a full-time job. I'm a teacher. I'm not going to spend the whole summer, working in the minor leagues. I mean, maybe, and they wouldn't give it to me even if I did it after I retired, because I'd be way too old for something like that. But to really improve your abilities, that'd be great. I would love that. And, that would show assigners that you're really serious about things and you're really trying to take that next step. That's really what it is. Trying to prove that you can maintain and that you can take that next step forward and to whatever the next level is for you. So that's kind of my take on umpire camps and what I think about that. Certainly would appreciate any feedback you might have for me. Send me an email or leave me a voice message and let me know what you think about it. I'm sure at some point I'll have some guys on here talking about that, particularly Bruce Stone Jr. I'll have him on talking about it. All right. All right. Well, Tim Farwig is joining us here on The Hammer, and Tim is a very accomplished NCAA Division I umpire. He's worked all kinds of levels in college baseball, from junior college and NAIA, D2, D3, and currently works mainly Division I in the Mid-American Conference, Big Ten, American Conference, Horizon, Atlantic 10. He's worked conference tournaments at lower levels. He's worked the MAC tournament before, I believe 3 NAIA World Series. Is that right, Tim?
Actually 4.
4. Okay, there we go. I want to get that one in there. And he's also worked internationally in the Pan American Games in Mexico and Panama. And he's an instructor at numerous camps throughout the Midwest. I met him at the Bruce Stone Senior umpire camps. And he's also a person that's done some charity work, which we'll get to a little bit later. So thank you for joining us. And first question, I guess, is how did you get into umpiring, Tim?
Well, probably not really any different than anybody else. When my kids were in Little League, it became very apparent that there was a need for the parents to volunteer and umpire, and I gravitated towards that as opposed to coaching, and started that when my oldest son was 6 years old, and just fell in love with being back in the game in that way, and not being satisfied that doing 6 and 7 and 8 year olds was going to be my ceiling. I basically started doing some research, joined the high school association here in Indiana, and then basically started going to camps and basically just continued to move up. And that in a nutshell is pretty much how I started umpiring.
Yep. So no pro school for you. You just kind of started from the bottom and just kept working at it and moved yourself up. So
that is correct.
Yep. And there's some inspiration there for a lot of guys, I guess. So you've worked with a variety of umpires over the years, high school level, all the way through college, and also international. So you've seen a lot of different guys, speaking different languages and everything else. But when it comes right down to it, what do you think makes a good umpire, no matter what language they speak or what they're doing?
Well, in my opinion, when you ask me a question like that, I don't look at it as it's a combination of a lot of things, and sometimes it's more of off the field than it is on the field. Yes, I think a good umpire or a good umpire is somebody who gets their calls right, but they're very consistent. They understand the rules. There's somebody who understands that knows how to take care of business on the field. And I think that's a big part of it. But I think the bigger part of what makes somebody a good umpire is basically how they handle themselves off the field with their partners, with their signers, just in general, because I think that's what makes or breaks people. It's funny, and this storyline is constant throughout umpiring, that when you receive an assignment, most umpires don't really care about where, when, what time. It's who am I working with, and I think that is the person who defines. That's the kind of umpire you want to be, and to me, that's what a good umpire is. Just somebody that you want to be with, somebody that you want to work with.
Yep, I definitely can attest to that. I'm one of those guys that look at who I'm working with too, just like anybody else. So.
Yeah, I don't even accept the assignment. I go and look and who am I working with? And as if that's going to change whether I accept it or not, but that's what I really care about.
Then you deal with it later if you don't like who you're working with, I guess.
Exactly. and quite honestly, I'm very fortunate. If there's a list, it's going to be very small of people that I wouldn't want to work with. And quite honestly, it's usually not because of what they can do on the field. It's the what you would call the cancer in a locker room. Just people you just don't want to be around after the game, before the game, or if you're traveling with them. That's usually when the problems happen and exist. Okay.
Well, that's, I think, a very interesting answer, and I think a lot of guys can relate to that. Well, one of the reasons I had you come on to the show is I did a little feature a couple episodes ago on the new stuff that they're doing with the 20-second rule in the NCAA. And you've had a little work this fall trying to figure out what the NCAA might be trying to have us do, and working with the new timing mechanisms. And what did you kind of discover this fall about this rule, and what is your kind of take on it all?
Well, I think when it was first introduced, and I don't know exactly when it was announced, but when it was first announced, I think there was a lot of confusion, because all that was announced was that this was the new rule. We didn't have any interpretations as to how it was going to be not only enforced, but just understood. We were taking wild guesses in some of the camps in late summer and early fall as to how this was going to happen. We even went so far as to test some new timers that are out on the market with our best guess as to how's this rule going to work. And then, fortunately, before a lot of the fall scrimmages started, and I'm actually looking at it right now, on October 1st, the NCAA, that is, published interpretations. And I believe the interpretations have clarified and made this rule and its enforcement much easier than we were ever thinking. So, long story short, I was able to use those interpretations, practice the timing guidelines in real games, and just get a good feel and idea of how this will work coming into the 2020 season.
Do you anticipate there'll be any problems, or do you think it'll be pretty smooth?
No, in fact, I would say officially did it 3 times during 3 scrimmage games. Of all the opportunities that you're timing, which is basically now every pitch with somebody on, especially, that was more importantly what we were trying to test. We only exceeded the 20-second clock, I would say, a handful of times over those 3 games. And part of it was these teams were still not practicing or emphasizing this yet. In fact, many coaches didn't even want to discuss it. They didn't want their kids or players to even know that this rule existed. But what I found, and I think what most people will find, especially in the Midwest, this is not a problem. And usually these things are driven by other areas of the country. But if you apply a common sense approach to the guidelines that we've been given, I don't anticipate there being any issue this coming season.
Well, I certainly hope you're right, because we have enough issues to deal with. We don't need something else.
And I do too. And I hope for that as well. I personally think, and I am fortunate, I don't work a lot of 2-man anymore. And I'm not saying that's that's not the fortunate part, but I'm fortunate that I get to work in multi-person crews, 3- and 4-man. So there's obviously trying to be attentive in a 2-man crew is going to be very difficult with this rule. And I think that the box timers that are on the market specifically for baseball are the only way you can go in basically enforcing this rule. And when I say enforcing this rule, that I mean actually keeping time on every pitch with somebody on base, especially.
Yeah, so a stopwatch is not going to cut it in 2-man.
A stop, absolutely not. And I think you're going to see it. I think you're going to see a lot of watches on people that you don't usually see. It's always been a kind of a no-no that you don't wear a watch on the field. And I know that's kind of changed with some of the fitness watches here over the last couple of years. But if your attention is drawn with your eyes to something else other than what's in front of you, that's where I think the problems are going to be, because things are going to be missed.
I agree.
And the excuse of, well, what do you want, the time, or do you want me to watch this? That's not going to fly. And these timers are an investment. I'm not, people have asked me, how much are they? And, I've told them, and they just look at me like, well, that's crazy. Yet I think these are the same people that will go out and buy a new chest protector.
Yeah, or new plate shoes or whatever they're doing.
Or new plate shoes at the drop. So to me, it's an investment in your profession, your craft, and I think it's a wise investment.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to be getting myself one before the season starts. Not saying I want to spend my money on it, but you kind of got to do it. So.
Right.
So you've been umpiring for a good number of years now, and think back to when you first started to umpire, either high school or in collegiately as well. And there's been lots of changes, whether the way that we umpire or the changes in the way baseball is. What are some of the things that maybe stand out to you as far as how things have changed since you first started doing this?
I think just some of the different rule emphasis that have changed since I've started collegiately. those have been the biggest changes, and a lot of them are about pace of play. You know, I've seen the hit by pitch basically come full circle in the rule changes. I think that's been an interesting way to look at things. But I think the biggest thing that, to me, that I've seen is just the thirst for knowledge or understanding of mechanics, and what you see now on social media and what different groups are putting out across the country, and just seeing guys gravitate to that and wanting more and more and more. I think, unfortunately, still at the high school association levels on down, that thirst for knowledge is not as great.
Yeah.
And I think that's unfortunate. And I can remember when I was really getting serious about umpiring, and not to make myself any older than I am, but the internet was relatively new. So finding things were very difficult. And nowadays, you don't have to work very hard to find that information. And I think that's the biggest difference that I've seen, along with the video. I mean, the video aspect of where potentially no matter what level you work now, whether it's, little league, 10, 11, and 12-year-olds, or Division I college, you have potentially are going to be on video somewhere, somehow. And I don't see that as a negative as much as I see that as a positive if you're using that to watch yourself, to evaluate yourself, to make yourself better. But those are, to me, those are some of the biggest differences that I've seen since I've been when I first started.
Yeah. Okay. Well, interesting. A few years ago, or not too long ago, I don't think, you started the Umpire Strong program, which is something you're very passionate about. Can you let everybody know what that is and maybe how they might be able to get involved with that?
Sure. Back in 2016, I had the opportunity to work my first international tournament in Mexico. And with trying not to get too deep and too long in the story here, I was told by many people that had done international baseball that don't be surprised if you basically leave everything you take with the other umpires, because most of them just don't have the ability to buy that equipment or have access to it. And so a lot of them rely on visiting umpires leaving their equipment. The case in point, there was an umpire from Colombia who showed up with nothing. And one of the first things he did when he got there was to seek me out and basically say, "Can I borrow your equipment?" That's basically when I worked the plate. And just as that time went on, it was roughly 2 weeks that I was there, just seeing what some of these umpires used and shared, and just made me think what we have is so abundant. I made the comment earlier, guys don't think twice about buying a new chest protector or new plate shoes or whatever. Well, if they're replacing something, that equipment is usually, if it was like me, it just kept building up in the closet. And I saw the need, and when I got back after that tournament and talked to several people, they all shared the same thing as, I just got all this stuff sitting around doing nothing. And what we did pretty quick after I came back from that tournament was to just collect it all between 3 or 4 of us and sent it through different various channels, very expensive channels, we found out, when you're FedExing to Mexico and to Panama, to Colombia. So different things like that. And that's where basically the Umpire Strong campaign arose. And what I've done since then is kind of used, whether it's here in Indiana, local association meetings to kind of talk about that, or the different camps. We would use, I use different camps that I might be working at as maybe a drop-off place for just used equipment, stuff that guys don't have a need for anymore, but still is good equipment. And that has been the easiest thing to do, in the sense of collecting the equipment, but the dispersion has been the most difficult part. And we've gone through a few different sources, but right now we work through a group called Umpires Without Borders in Chicago, and that has been a very established and stable group that works with a bunch of different groups internationally. And so basically Umpire Strong is just kind of the collegiate arm for them to collect equipment. And like I said, I didn't want to make that a long story, but
that's okay.
That's kind of in a nutshell what's been going on. We've kind of changed the focus of having, all these huge campaigns with money and websites and different things like that, and kind of back down and just kind of let word of mouth and a little bit of social media and just, those type of things, just kind of spread the word and to continue to collect. And a lot of equipment has been collected. A lot of it has gone all over the world at this point, especially through the Umpires Without Borders. So it's to me, the most gratifying thing is when I get pictures back from where it's gone, and you can say, hey, I remember that mask. Or you see umpires in Mexico wearing CBUA hats, which to them is like gold. And that, I think, giving them the opportunity to, especially down in Latin America, giving them the opportunity to do what they love to do with better equipment is just a very satisfying thing. So I'll continue to do it as long as people are willing to continue to donate equipment and uniforms.
Okay. And I believe you have a website or something, right, for that, if somebody wants to check it out and maybe try to get involved? Or
well, like I said, the website, we've kind of let that...
Oh, you let that go with the...
Kind of let that die, because what I have found is social media works just as well anymore nowadays. So Umpire Strong does have a Facebook page. We do kind of use the moniker Ump Strong. That's kind of our little nickname or slogan, if you will. But basically, if you look up Umpire Strong on Facebook and message through that, you'll contact me, and we can always find a way to get that equipment or let you know of somewhere that might be a collection point somewhere during the year.
Great. Awesome. Well, that's all I've really got for you, Tim, and I really appreciate you coming on. And you're the first guest ever, so you have those bragging rights for whatever that's worth.
Well, I will treat that as an honor, and I appreciate you asking me to be on. And I wish you well in the off season, and wish everybody well as the 2020 season is just around the corner. Yeah,
it'll be here before we know it, for sure.
Exactly.
So. All right. Well, thanks. For this week's rules segment, I'd like to look at the designated hitter rule and the history of the DH. Younger umpires don't realize that the DH has not been something that's been around ever since the inception of baseball. Even for myself, it's basically been around most of my whole life. I mean, I came in 1973, and so I was just barely being able to walk by the time that happened. But the DH is used, throughout professional baseball now, of course, and throughout amateur baseball, except for the National League, which, they voted in 1980 to try to adopt the DH, and that didn't go through, and we really haven't seen anything since then. There's a lot of people, and I have to say I'm on the side of thinking that, both leagues should use the DH. I mean, I do like National League Baseball and the differences in the way the game is played. But if you're doing interleague play like they do, it only makes sense nowadays. It's, there are too close of leagues. But anyway, it's also, a fixture in professional leagues in Japan since 1975. They use it in interleague play if you're in the American League Park. Same thing with the World Series, which is kind of fair and unfair. The NCAA and the NFHS have their own versions of the DH rule. It was incorporated in college baseball in 1974. The Big Ten and the Western Athletic Conference experimented with it, and then they added it in there. They tried to have it basically be used in a similar fashion that the American League was using it, but if, as anyone that umpires college baseball knows, the NCAA designated hitter rule is much more complicated than what they use in the American League or high school or any other place. If you don't know about that, you should look online and look up the designated hitter rule for NCAA and just read those 3 or 4 pages that are in the rule book for that. Anyway, the college rule, provides that the same player could serve as the pitcher and a designated hitter, which in a certain way is a good thing, but it's definitely caused some problems over the years. High school added it in 1976, and it was permitted to, you're permitted to have a DH in place of any starter, regardless of their position. Of course, last week I talked about the changes to that for 2020, which makes it a little more complicated, but probably a better rule as far as getting more players involved in the game. All right. So that's our little history of the designated hitter rule that's been around with us since 1973. They were working on some things with that a few years before that. It's not going to go away. Baseball purists don't always like it, but there's some value to it as well, and definitely something you need to be familiar with for whatever level you plan on working. So that's the designated hitter and its history. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of The Hammer, an umpire podcast. I appreciate all of you sticking with me till the end here for this episode, which ended up being a little bit longer than some of our previous installments. But I would hope that you would agree that it was definitely worthwhile, particularly our interview with Tim Farwig. And I'd like to extend my gratitude to Tim for being our first ever guest on The Hammer. I think he did a great job and definitely showed his passion for umpiring and the game of baseball and being the kind of teacher and leader that he is within the umpiring community. He talked about his Umpire Strong program that he started and gave details within the interview of how you might get in contact with him or get involved with that if that's something that you choose to do. I certainly urge you to do that if you can. Definitely something in umpiring is, giving back. All of us in our own way have certain successes, some more than others, but everybody has some certain successes, and you got to pass on the knowledge that you've come across and help the people coming behind you. They might be younger, they might be older than you, but it does better for our whole umpiring community if we all get a little bit better. And it makes all of our jobs a little bit easier along the way too. Well, I'm trying to put out an episode maybe once a week. That's kind of the goal now, somewhere around the weekend to have it drop. And that's what I've been doing the last few weeks here. We'll see how I can keep on that schedule with everything else going on in life. And also whatever interviews and such that I can line up. If you have any feedback for me on topics you'd like me to cover, people you'd like to have me try to get on the show, please send me an email. spinalfusion06@yahoo.com. Please leave me a voicemail through the Anchor app. It can be 60 seconds or less. If you don't want me to use that voicemail on the show, that's fine too. You could just kind of state that in the voicemail. But if it's just a quick way for you to give me some feedback, I'd appreciate that as well. And if you don't say anything, I might use it on the show. So, those are kind of the thoughts that I have as far as, where the direction of the show is going. I think I have a lot of topics I can get to as we move through this off season before things start really getting to roll in February and March for a lot of guys around the country. And so until then, keep calling strikes.